In today's case study episode, we have a cyclist who has increased his time trial speed by over 4 kilometers per hour. He went from averaging a speed of low 40 kilometers per hour to 44.5 kilometers per hour. And in a 40-kilometer time trial, and whether you're a cyclist or a triathlete in an Olympic distance triathlon, the distance is 40 kilometers. That's going to wipe off almost 6 minutes. That is a monster gain. And for someone that was already riding 40.5 kilometers an hour, they're clearly a good rider, but to go up to 44.5 is a massive gain. So we're going to go through, as always, exactly what we did to help him change and help him improve. So I want to introduce this athlete, Dave. He's a small, very light Master 6 athlete, so that makes him in the 55 to 59-year-old category. But being quite small and light, that makes it hard to be a good time trialer. Not always, that's not always the rule, but you tend to think as these good time trialers that can really just be a rock and hold that monster power. But he's a great climber. He's also a surgeon, so he has a very intense workload. And all these factors are really important to set up the actual phase of who this athlete is that we're talking about and how we help them improve, because we're trying to give you examples of how people can get these results when they're in similar positions to what you might be yourself. So he came to us 3 years ago because he'd been riding for a long time, and he just found in the last few years of his training before he came to us, something was stopping from improving. And he wanted to find out what it was. And basically, the setup for this was he tried a lot of things. He was with a coaching group. They had no structure. They were doing the same sessions every day. And he did improve a little bit doing that, but he hit a wall. And then he moved on to some online programs. And once again, he was basically just a one-dimensional rider. He'd improved, but after a while, he hit a plateau, as everyone does when they do the same kind of riding. And his numbers stayed the same. And the setup really is he was flogging himself in training for years and ended up hating the sessions. He wasn't improving and not enjoying it. And from Trivelo perspective, what are our goals? Number 1 is improvement. Number 2 is enjoyment. Or we could even flip it around. We would say enjoyment first and then improvement. And he was doing neither. So he really felt like he was missing something. And Dad, welcome to the episode. I want to say that 2 of the key things he felt like he was missing were the communication and accountability. So let's kind of go through, that's the setup. Let's go through with Dave kind of where he was and what he felt like he was missing.
Yeah, Dave's been a real joy to coach, and so are most of the athletes that come on board. And I've absolutely loved seeing his improvement. And ironically, you mentioned that he's in the Masters 6 category, and that's not a young rider. And for all those people who've ridden a time trial bike and know what 40 kilometers an hour is and so hard to do, and the majority of riders that we coach range between 28 k's an hour to probably 35, 36 k's an hour. That would be the range of athletes that we coach. And we have a small percentage, maybe 15, 20% of athletes who can actually ride above 40 k's an hour. We have 2 or 3% who can ride above 45. So we've got a really vast range of abilities in our coaching group. And Dave was one of those guys who was a good rider, but I felt like he wasn't reaching his potential. And it was such a breath of fresh air when he came on board, because he was absolutely sick of the way he'd been doing it for so long, and he was really not enjoying the lack of improvement, and therefore you don't enjoy your riding as much. As from everybody out there listening, you know that you'll get more fun when you're riding better. The correlation is huge, and when you're riding poorly, it sucks and you hate it. And he got to a point where he probably wasn't going to keep riding that much more, but anyway, he decided to reach out, and we're so grateful we did, because of it's formed a really great relationship with Dave, and he lives in WA and I live in Victoria, and so we don't see each other that often, but I feel like I know him quite intimately, and had the privilege of taking him to Belgium and seeing him firsthand, and what a pocket rocket he is as a bike rider. And I cannot get across the message to everybody listening here how particular he is about his training, and there would be, over the 3 years, be very few sessions that he's missed. And that is one of the things that he said to me, was he loved the fact that he had someone who made him accountable and was desperate for structure, just wanted to know, what am I supposed to be doing tomorrow in relation to what I did today? And should I do something hard tomorrow because I've done something hard today? And that waking up each day knowing that my session's already planned out for me, and I know that my coach has got my best interests of improvement at heart, and this is going to be a little bit of a slow burn, but I have to go backwards before I go forwards. And he had that mindset straight away in our initial consultation, was, you just tell me what to do, Jared, and I'll do it. And that's music to my ears. And someone who's going to really trust the program, not do a version of it, and they will get the outcome. And it's not a 3-month outcome that we're looking for here. This is a 3-year And he didn't ride 44.5 k's an hour in the first 6 months. He was miles away from that. It's a process. So everybody out there who's listening to this, don't think about these things as a quick fix. You have to put the time in. And there's so much to learn about when to apply the right power in certain positions, in a race. And training to execute like that is the key to doing it in a race. And it doesn't matter what sport you're doing, whether it's time trialing individually or time trialing in a triathlon, you still need to learn how to ride the bike properly in the conditions. And of course, getting a bike fit and getting the setup right with your equipment, that will go a long way to improving you. But you need to know what sessions to do, how to ride the power on a time trial bike. It's just not the same as riding a bike. You need to understand when the times are to ride a little bit harder and when the times are to ride a little bit easier.
That's so true. I mean, finding speed on the time trial bike, as we've spoken about in many podcasts, comes down to many factors, and you've just identified some of those key ones. It's starting with, what training are you doing? And for him, he was doing far too much of the same type of training, and he wasn't doing anything specific enough that was really going to improve his time trialing. He was training really hard, but as we're about to show you, the actual training that he needs to be doing was quite different to what he was doing. Then it comes down to a lot of other factors, your position on the bike, your equipment, what you were saying. Just saying, sure, upgrading your bike, upgrading your position, upgrading all forms of equipment is really going to help. But then that won't make a difference if you're actually not executing properly. And you can do some great training, but if you're getting to race day not executing well, when to push the right power at the right times, when to back it off, when to push harder, executing evenly, these are all things that you need to be able to get right. So let's get really specific with his training and go through what he actually did to improve. And the key one I want to start with is that one of the most important sessions in his program to improve this is the sub-threshold session. And can you take us through what he's built up to now, what he does regularly in terms of this sub-threshold session, and define kind of what zone that it's in?
Yeah, and look, this is just one of the sessions. And for those who are listening, don't try and do this session every day for 5 days or 6 days. This is just one of the sessions that are in his program. And does this one stand out more than the others? Probably not, because each session that we have in his program is really specifically aiming at something that we're trying to achieve with him. And in his case, to be a better threshold rider. And so the sub-threshold seems really weird when we talk about specificity, don't we, a lot on this podcast. And if you want to ride faster, you need to practice riding faster. And that's true. That is absolutely true. There's nothing wrong with that sentence. But you can't do that day in, day out. And that's why the sub-threshold, where you're riding just below threshold, if threshold is 100% and sub-threshold is somewhere between 88 and 94 to 96% of your 100% effort. So doing that is repeatable. And that's why it's such a good session to do. And you can do it for, if we're doing threshold or VO2 work or max efforts, the time we can spend doing that is somewhere between 8 minutes and probably 30. Whereas as a sub-threshold session, we can do 2x30 or 2x40. But I need to be careful what I say here, because he built up from 2x10 minutes, 2x15, 2x20, 2x30 over a period of 3 years. So, he can really nail now. And where he lives in WA, there's a great time trial. There's actually great bike paths for time trialing. And there's one north of the city where it's specifically for time trialing for bike riders, and it's uninterrupted, no traffic lights, and you can ride in one direction for 40 minutes without having to be really disrupted at all, and then turn around and come back. So he does that session, and he's built that up to 2x40, where he's riding anywhere between, we give him a variation between 86 to 90 to 94% of his FTP, and to be able to do that, week in, week out, that is one of the key sessions that is actually going to get you to be able to ride at threshold and above so much more comfortably if you've been able to do, 1 hour 20 of riding at between 80 and 92%. And that's an extreme example. It's taken him a long time to get to one of those or two of those sessions. So, repeating sessions of doing, 2 by 15 minutes, that is where most competent cyclists could start. And, not just riding at 90% the whole time, varying it from, 5 minutes at 86 and then 4 minutes at 92 and then 3 more minutes at 88 and, in that 15 minutes, so that you're getting the feeling of, if you're on a perfectly flat road, which he is out the back of WA, not all time trials are perfectly flat. So we need to understand that when, we need to vary our power So we're trying to replicate that change of power, change of percentage of power in a training session so that it replicates what we might encounter during an actual real time trial where we've got hills and wind. So we're not just sitting on a number for 2 by 40 minutes. We're varying it so that you are getting used to changes in pressure on the pedals, and that is something that's taken a long time. I keep emphasising that. And I really want that message to get home. Don't go out and do this straight away. This is something you have to build into.
And what you've just described there is a bit more of an advanced kind of version of the sub-threshold session rather than just doing 2 by 40 minutes at that range, 88 to 96. There are reasons why we sometimes break it up into the 40 minutes broken down into 10 minutes of this and 6 minutes of this and 3 minutes of that. And yeah, that is to replicate the course as well as to get used to sitting in various parts of the range to see how it feels and see what you're capable of holding. So that's a really cool example of how it can actually work and the variation you can get in that one session. So we want to keep going through what changes were made to his training weeks and his overall structure. And one of the next ones is the balance between training on his own and not being in a group unless we needed him to, but then certain times when he was actually in a group. So can you talk us through that?
It's a really good topic because the majority of cyclists love riding socially with their mates, and that's what we want. We encourage that. It's got so many positives. You will be pushed if you're in a group that's better than you. That's a great outcome. Getting yourself in a group where your mates are better. If you're the kingpin in the group, it is a lot harder to get the value out of the session. The things you would try to do is attack and stay away. That you're making a competition within a competition, but the thing that he was doing before was just all the rides were group rides and all the rides were chasing and competitive, everybody pushing each other. And that's great. We want to pick the eyes out of that and select those sessions where we want them and not do them every day, every week. And so continuing to ride that hard the same way every day is unsustainable. And so therefore it's extreme riding, and anything that is extreme in this world, we can't maintain. It's unsustainable. So we need to actually have days where in a 4-week block, I might say to Dave, okay, 2 of these sessions out of this 4 weeks, I want you to go with the group, and I want you to make that as hard as you possibly can. We're using the group for our advantage. We're using that group ride where he's going to be pushed, and we know that's the Tuesday morning, and he can go, or the Friday morning, he can go and do that session. And I'm saying to him, feel free, you ride as hard as you like in this. You can attack, you can hang on, you can be the aggressor, do whatever you like, but just push yourself. And so he knows that that's the purpose of that session. We talked about the sub-threshold session. We don't want him to go over his 94% in that sub-threshold session, but here we are, we've got the next session where we're asking him to do completely a different form of training. This is where he sort of was going, wow, this is great. I've got a specific session on a Sunday that I need to do, and now I've got a couple of bunch rides that I'm allowed to jump into or not. And if I feel he's done too many of them in a period, I would say no more bunch rides. You need to go and do a specific training session where we're controlling your threshold or your VO2. So he's really on board with that. And there's some days where we've got an event coming up where it might be a particular road championships or a race that he's aiming for. Well, I will throw him in a few more bunch rides. But prior to that, maybe 14 weeks out or 10 weeks out, we would be doing a lot more of training on his own where he's riding specifically to his numbers, and we're controlling that. And there is a difference between riding hard controlled and riding hard with the freedom to ride as hard as you like. And getting a mixture of those two things is gold. That's what we want. We want to have that variation in the training. And again, we're trying to stop you from repeating the same thing day after day. That is, if you haven't heard it already, that's the message we're trying to get across. And that's an example of how he's adapted one of his other sessions.
Perfect. And then another key one is something that we've built up over time, and we've used that built up word a bit. And we want to say that and stress that because he is 3 years into the program, and what he's doing are quite large sessions. And we wouldn't expect everyone to build up to 2 by 40 minutes or 3 by 40 minutes sub-threshold. And we wouldn't expect everyone to do this session, which is he's consistently doing 4, 5, 6 hour rides in the hills, basically huge volume at zone 2. And now he can even handle in these rides strength efforts. You're giving him strength efforts in the hills at 70, 80, 90%, kind of efforts in the middle of those 4 to 5, 6 hours. And just think about how strong he's getting doing that kind of riding. And he can do that and recover well. He can do that. It doesn't wipe me out for the week. And it takes a lot to get there. And that consistency you mentioned at the very start of this topic when we start talking about his training. He's been one of the more consistent trainers, and that's allowed him to get to this point. But that is such a key session. I think that, the thought process needs to be, you can just imagine how strong he is being able to do that because he does it so consistently.
Yeah, and it's important that we do that in the right range and not be riding too hard, because if you do that too hard, and that sounds like a really funny and strange thing to say, but what scenarios would you find if you find yourself in where you are riding that long 4-hour plus ride? Well, if you're with a group who are better than you, you've got no choice if you want to keep up with the group to ride at the best rider's tempo, and that's not your zone 2. You'll be in zone 3, 4, or 5 at variations. So right from the outset, I said to Dave, I would rather you did this on your own if you're okay with that. And he was absolutely okay with that. And the reasons were so that we could stay in zone 2 and you weren't being pushed into areas where you didn't want to go, because we still have to train the next day and the next day. And so he did that beautifully. He embraced that. And we didn't start at 4 hours with Dave, even though he'd been doing a lot of endurance riding with bunches. He'd been doing quite a lot of 4-hour rides with bunches, but I tried to explain to him that going 4 hours solo compared to going with a 4-hour bunch ride, there's lots of periods where you're sitting in on the bunch and you're getting a free ride, whereas when you're riding by yourself, you are in charge of every stroke of pedal action that you're doing, and you're in the wind the whole time. So he was a lot more tired than he ever imagined when he was doing it solo. But so we started a long time ago with 2 to 3 hour endurance rides, and we've built our way up to, as you've explained already, to that he regularly does 5 and 6 hours in the hills, and he can recover no problem. But that took a long time.
I mean, just try it, go for a 4-hour bunch ride where there's guys attacking it. It's really high intensity. Both sessions are fatiguing and then you go do 4 hours of just zone 2 pressure on the pedals solo, and it's a different type of fatigue. The zone 2 solo just wears you down because you're having to keep the pace up yourself. And even though it's zone 2, it should be below that LT1, it still absolutely wears you down. So kind of some summaries about his training week is he definitely rides the time trial bike at least once or twice per week, and that is so specific to making sure that his time trialing actually improves. He has 3 really easy days in the week, recovery days, and the rest of his week is, as we've mentioned, kind of is made up of VO2 sessions, sub-threshold, like we said, high volume zone 2, potentially a high intensity bunch ride in there. And so that kind of summarizes his training week. And then moving on to how he kind of fixed his time trial, and he gained 4.5 kilometers per hour in terms of speed. The next kind of things we're looking at his time trial position and his execution. So he has definitely been someone that's looked at every element of his bike position, his equipment, and he's upgraded it all to help him get the most out of himself.
Yeah, and look, one of the things we probably didn't mention was he's regularly racing time trials, and he's in a fortunate position. One of the sessions that he does in that week block, and it could be, in a 6-week period or a 2-3 week block period, he may have 2 time trials that are available to him, and we would slot that into his Sunday session in replacement for the sub-threshold session. We don't want to do that too often, and he's lucky being in Western Australia. The Australian Time Trial Association run time trials pretty much every second weekend, which is absolutely brilliant. If you live in WA in Perth, you have that opportunity to really test yourself. And it reminds me of in England, they have time trialing is a sport on its own. It's a bike riding sport, and people are only time trialers. They don't do anything else. They just time trial. And so, they're getting huge numbers to these time trials in WA, and you get a chance to really hone your skill of execution, which has taken the great conversations I've had with Dave is been around analysing what he's done in these ATTA time trials and looking at, sometimes they do a 5-lap course and we can break it down and say, look, lap 1, you did 270 watts and your time was 5 seconds faster than lap 2, lap 3, lap 4, etc. And we break that down and see where he can improve and put the power down differently for the same fitness that he has. And those nuances are really the execution thing that we kind of gloss over a bit, but that takes a lot of our time together, is working out where we can improve with the same fitness level. And of course, the bike time trial position, getting a bike fit, the equipment you're using, which we'll talk about now, and that is going to be also a game-changing thing that he can do.
Quite simply, he improved his bike setup, got better equipment all around, not just the bike itself. He got more aero, and that all contributes. But what's really interesting is he actually got a new power meter for the bike, and it was reading lower power. When he switched over, it was clearly reading lower power than what he's used to, and that can be a big mind game with yourself, and you're having to convince him to you're riding well, and he's actually riding faster, but his power's lower, and that can be a real big ego blow. And you're having to say to him, forget the old power meter, it's different equipment now, and so you have to go off the new power meter number, and that is frustrating because you work so hard to get that power up, and now you're riding 20 watts lower. But understand the whole goal is to go faster. It's not about improving power necessarily. The goal is faster, and that's what he was doing. So that's really a funny one to think about.
To Dave's credit, he got over it very quickly. But I have trouble with others who just are fixated on the power. And my example to those people are, look, if you rode 44.5 k's an hour and you averaged 60 watts, would you be upset?
Yeah.
No, you wouldn't. You'd be going, oh, well, 60 watts will get me 44 k's an hour. I'll take that any day. So that the power number is whatever it is. And if you can ride 40 k's an hour and that equals 200 watts, then you need to ride 210 watts to do 41 k's an hour. So that's kind of what we're trying to do. And whether you used to be able to ride with an old power meter 250 watts and now that same number's 200 for the same speed, that's all that matters, is the actual speed. And whatever that power number is to get that speed is the important thing. So we're fixated on this, well, what's your power? But no one actually should ask, what's your watts per kilo is more important than that. So that's another whole topic anyway.
But once again, the watts per kilo is only determined by the power meter. So yeah, it is a bit of a rabbit hole. But yeah, I mean, and we move from that to the execution, and we don't want to gloss over it, but we don't want to go into too much detail, because with execution, there is so much detail you can go into. And that's what you need to understand, is that you could be breaking down every single lap. And we had a great example actually last night where there was a local ITT race in Melbourne. A bunch of our guys did it. It was a 5-lap course, and we were looking over the data. I was looking over the data of everyone's individual laps, and there was definitely multiple examples of people riding higher power for a lap, but it was a slower lap. They were potentially 6 or 8 or 10 watts higher in a certain lap, but they rode slower, and that just shows that they've ridden harder in the wrong sections for that specific lap. And it happens all the time. I mean, I just actually did a hill repeat session this morning, and it was not just a straight hill gradient. It kind of kicked up a little bit, and then it had a bit of a fairly false flat section, and then it really kicked up again. And every rep I did, I kind of wrote it slightly differently. Did the first section a bit harder. Probably sometimes in the reps went too hard in that section. And therefore, on the false flat, I went too slow. And then, it kicks up again. And regardless, however you execute each individual lap, you'll get a different time. But it's not always going to be linear, like more power equals better time on these climbs. It's where you execute. So that just really, it's a hard concept for a lot of us to understand. But when you break it down lap by lap, you can actually see the evidence.
Yeah, and Dave's really good at the analytical side of his training and his racing, and that's music to my ears. If someone's really that invested, and we have great conversations about his execution in any particular event that he's been in or is going to do, and one of the things that I've really drilled into him is to start a little bit conservatively and try to come home stronger. And because that's the opposite to what he was doing when he first started. And now having to say to him, hey, you can risk a bit more because, we know that your number is a little bit better than that. So, in some of the races where they're not your complete A race, where you're banking 6 months training into this one race, the other races, you should be experimenting with where is my red line? Can I cross it? And what happens if I do? The example would be if you're taking a really sharp corner on a ride that you're out with, and you don't know how fast you can go around that corner, and you're just testing to see what angle you need to be putting your bike at. And then when you fall over and hit the ground, you realize that's the tipping point. And this is the same with FT with your power number. Push yourself as close as you can to the red zone, that number where you might actually have to back off slightly, because therefore you get better perspective of, and that's what Dave's really good at, and he's really embraced that concept, and his execution is outstanding from where it started with, and because he's really willing to listen and comprehend the explanation of why we're doing it this way, and we know that when the bike is going slowest, that's the time when you need to be at the top of the range that you've set yourself, and when your bike's going fastest, you need to be not at the top of the range, but you need to be somewhere in the range, but conserving, so that when the hard bit comes again, you're ready to push the power again. He's embraced that concept, and that is hard for me to get across. It sounds so easy, but people, when they get out there, they love going fast with the tailwind, and they end up riding more power in the tailwind than they are in the headwind, and wonder why they're slower.
Exactly. Yeah, slower overall. And all these factors are what contributed to such an incredible improvement in time trialing speed. But it's not just his time trial that he's improved. He's become a better all-round rider, and I think one of the best examples of this was he ended up winning the state road title over in Western Australia. And I think for you, that was one of those examples of just classic great post-race conversation, which you love having with an athlete, whether they win a title, whether they have a great PB, whether they have the best executed performance they've had in a while, where they're seeing the results come off. It was something that he never thought he'd win. Actually, he said himself, he's never come close. He never really thought it was possible, and that would have been a great coach athlete moment where, to take that state road title is exceptional. It shows being an exceptional all well-rounded rider, a complete opposite to the one-dimensional rider he was before.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. And because we had brought along his zone 2 endurance and strength, we brought along his sub-threshold, we brought along his high-intensity bunch riding and specific training sessions around that, we'd allowed him to recover in his weekly program. We'd given him lots of races. We'd talked tactics. We talked about attacking the bunch, using his strength. His strength is threshold riding. His strength isn't short, punchy climbs where the big guys can really punch it out, but he's got great recovery. So his tactics to win a state road race is, most people can be as strong as they like, but if they don't have the right tactics plus the ability to execute, they'll never win anything. And so it was a really enjoyable discussion for him to come out and say, I could not have raced that any better. I did all the tactics we've talked about for 2 years, and I was able to attack and separate the sprinters, get rid of them. And then, it was almost like it was too easy in the end to win. And it was a great conversation, and one of those ones that you really love your job for. And, the excitement he had about, winning something he never thought was possible. And, a couple of things he asked me to do when he joined was, see if I could win a race and see if I could improve my time trialing and be competitive. And he's quite feared now. In a lot of local bunches as an older guy. Dave's there today, expect a hard ride, and a lot of the guys are looking in awe at what he's doing. As a young 50-year-old now, he's an older 50-year-old. He's actually better than he was 6 years ago, and it's, he just can't take the smile off his face, the way he's just embracing the fact that he loves, it's almost like his job now. He loves racing his bike, and that all-round thing that you mentioned is the key to it, and having variation in your program where you're not doing the same thing over and over. And as I said earlier, doing the same thing will get you to a certain point, and you will get fit. And I'm not disputing that. But it will eventually stagnate, and you'll be the same rider forever unless you change something.
Yeah, for sure. So, in conclusion, we actually asked him, for this case study to summarize his experience, and he said a lot of great things, which we're really chuffed with. But I think one of the best and also funniest things he said was that, having a coach to talk to, that he was close enough that he could see as a mate and as a friend, but at the same time, he was slightly fearful that, he wasn't sure what would happen if he missed a session. I think you laughed pretty hard at that.
Yeah, well, it's a funny thing to hear, actually. I don't think that I put fear into people, but evidently there is a certain line where I must have a different tone to my voice where I'm saying, what happened yesterday or what happened over the weekend? And I think people really are uncomfortable answering that question if they've legitimately been lazy. And I can never accuse Dave of that. But, he's had some horrible crashes, which has really put him back a fair bit. And that's a good point. He's had a lot of setbacks over the journey, unfortunately, crashing where people have fallen in front of him, and you can't do anything about some of those things. And but it changes the next 6 weeks, doesn't it, if you've got broken bones? And but he's been resilient enough to come back, and because he's got such a great fitness base, he's been able to resume very quickly and almost get back up to speed. And just going through COVID at the moment. So, once again, he's got a race in 4 weeks that he's been aiming for, and, how is this going to affect his performance? We'll never know. But that athlete-coach relationship where there's a healthy respect, I respect the fact that he really wants to improve, and his desire it comes through, and I'm absolutely on board helping people who are reaching out with, asking any questions they like, because if they're there to improve, that's, I can't embrace that enough. And he barely missed a session in all the times. It's always been through sickness or injury, and it's not because he couldn't be bothered or lost motivation. So, the care factor, I suppose, is what he's trying to say to me, is that he loves that aspect, and that's what he feels. He's got someone who's actually making him accountable, and he's got the best program that he's never done a program like this before. In all the years of riding, he's been able to bring along the areas where he's felt he's weak, his high intensity stuff, his ability to ride threshold, and ability to sustain sub threshold riding, getting stronger, and in getting that endurance strength work. They're the things that he's just loved, got him along this journey.
Yeah, you basically just said the fact that we care so much about his improvement is the best part about it, and it's a really great balance between when to push and when to not. I think that's really key. And we joke about the fear thing, and I do want to reiterate to people out there that you don't ever, or we don't ever scold anyone for missing a session. It's the what happened question is genuinely just asking, is there something happening? And normally there's valid reasons for why people miss sessions. They might say I didn't feel like it, or they might say I was just too fatigued, or something might have come up with work life, which is the age grouper training life cycle and lifestyle. But we just want to reiterate that the number one goal, the primary goal from us, is the enjoyment factor in the process and the improvement in the process. And we can tick those off, we have. So this has been a fairly in-depth case study, and we've gone right into detail about this. So we hope you've enjoyed this insight into this improvement. But we achieved our goals of enjoyment and improvement. Any last thoughts from you?
No, and I think that last point you made, definitely my questioning is always around, is everything okay with your training? Not as to why you didn't do it in a harsh way. It's always, are you okay? Making sure that you're making good decisions yourself. And that's one of the things we do say a lot on the podcast is you have to, understand how you're feeling, and that will determine whether we adjust the program. And that's what Dave's really good at. He'll let me know very early on that not quite up for it today, and we'll adjust the program straight away. And that's what makes him hardly miss anything through illness or being overtrained or he's just never experienced that under this program because he's quick to tell me what is going on with his feelings, and I can adapt and adjust that quickly. So he's got the enjoyment factor because the improvement keeps happening, and when you're improving, it's so much more fun than stagnating or wondering what is going wrong with me. So yeah, it's been a really good one to get out to the audience because I really rate the way he's gone about it, and I think he's got a lot more to improve on even now, and I can't wait to see how he fares in the future.
That's it for this episode. Thanks as always for listening. If you would like to achieve the same kind of improvement as Dave has and enjoyment, you can go to our website, tribellacoaching.com.au, and apply for coaching there. And the process is we simply have an interview and consult with you and find out what you're doing and see if the coach-athlete relationship can work. And that's really important to us, that the relationship is there to establish from a foundation to help you, again, enjoy that process of achievement, improvement, and enjoy the actual process of training itself. So tune in weekly to all our episodes. We have a weekly episode where we discuss how you can train smarter and race faster, and of course the case study episodes, which people are absolutely loving. Thank you very much. We'll see you in the next episode.